This is Norvell Central coming back at you on the YouTube video, and I really do appreciate all the love and support so far. As I'm recording this, it is Saturday morning. We are one Saturday away from Florida State being able to take on New Mexico State on the CW network at 7 o'clock Eastern Time. It's going to be a great time for Florida State fans to really enjoy everything, and I'm super excited to get started and get back to posting as much content as I possibly can. I know it's going to be a great time for Florida State fans to kind of get back in there because guess what? It's been a long offseason. We've wanted to see a lot of things from Florida State, and obviously there's hesitancies. You know, there's Mike Norvell that you're trying to figure out what you got to have. He's going back to play Call of Duty. You're bringing in a new quarterback in Ashton Daniels, and there's a lot of different moving pieces for this team. Obviously, winning 7 games in 2 years, there's a lot of just skepticism from the fan base. And I don't blame them because you're investing so much time. You're investing in football-only facilities. You're investing trying to move into a different conference. You know, you're extending your head coach a couple of years ago. You're bringing in different kind of NIL opportunities for these other players. And it's like, when is the money going to be able to stop it? Not even to include the stadium renovations you just had. I just think there's a lot of things that Florida State fans are investing in this program. And why you could say, quote unquote, they're poor. They're not poor. You know, we have a lot of money. We have a lot of passionate fans that do care about this university, and they just want to see Florida State be successful. But I don't want to get on my negative train today. I want to be able to kind of be positive, but I do want to address something that I think is a little bit more concerning about this season, and that is the defensive line. Obviously, you have that defense that in Tony White's system under year one was decent. I mean, you saw some pretty good flashing moments. You saw the Wake Forest game. You saw the Alabama season opener that just basically sprung open a whole new world of ideas. But then, you know, he got involved in the UCLA coach rumors, and you saw that defense kind of slide down a little bit. Then the Virginia game was kind of unmistakable. You know, you were about to score 28 unanswered points. You know, you had Jerry Wilson try up a potential pick six to go up 28-14, and then next thing you know, they tied the football game. They were missing a lot of tackles. You know, there's just a lot of things going on there, and I think that's what game that it was that spiraled Florida State's season out of control and basically lost 7 of their last 9. But I don't want to really blame it on a lot of last year because I understand that 3-3-5 defense is something that Florida State fans aren't accustomed to. Some of them don't even think it's going to work in Florida State, and I get it. But year 2, I think, is going to be much better. I do think the defense is a lot better, and I think it all comes down to linebacker Chris Jones. Transfer, you know, had 135 tackles last year. He's one of the better defenders on this team, and I do think that this can be a factor for Florida State to really go into because, you know, they didn't have to go out there and get Chris Jones. You know, he already committed to Ole Miss and then signed over there, but then Florida State was able to kind of get him back. And I know the defensive line, when you look at it as a whole, I think is improved from last year. Now, granted, you don't have James Williams anymore, and that was a big flop for this team. You don't have Jason Jenkins, you know, and then you have Deontay McCray returning from the transfer portal last year, and then you have Diamante Diggs. I think there are some pieces in this team to be grateful for and successful for. But the thing I think is the most pressing need for this team is the Desir twins. You saw them enter the transfer portal last year. Florida State paid up and paid top money for those guys to come back. Now, obviously, you need to have Mandro Desir kind of have a similar success he did last year. Obviously, he had in 5 games last year, he had 5 sacks. And I mean, this is the guy that you want to see more productivity from. You know, he had a great final last year. But the thing I worry about the most is his twin brother. You know, he didn't have that much production last year. He only had 1.5 sacks. And you want to see more from him. And that way they can be able to kind of be on the field together. They can be productive. But obviously, Mandrell's going to be double teamed at times. There's going to be times where, you know, you're not going to have a, you know, Darryl Jackson, 6'5", 337-pound defensive tackle just in the middle of your defense, kind of guarding the run. And a lot of times last year, you saw that concern from the run game. You know, Alabama didn't really have a pulse in running the football, but you saw at the very end of the year with Jay Bob in Florida, even a team that wasn't even that good, he rushed for 225 yards. I mean, this is a team that needs to have more defensive line pressure, and it needs to be up in the interior. The one concerning part that I had in all of this was, you know, you also had the Desir twins enter the transfer portal, but then you had Kevin Wynn enter the transfer portal. They brought him back. They were able to give him top dollar. And I think there's a lot of things there that you're not hearing from Kevin Wynn. And you thought that you'd be able to hear some of this stuff, and it just hasn't come to fruition. And I want to see more productivity from them because I think if you're able to get Mantrell Desir, you're able to get Darryl Desir, you know, Diamante Diggs, you know, other guys like that, I think are so important. But I think the bigger factor is you got a Daniel Lyons who you think is going to be pretty good for your team. They've been super high on him. And I think this could be a factor that, you know, everybody can kind of lean to. And, Jordan Sanders, I think he's a bigger body that you want from like 6'4", 320. I think could be a big factor for them. Deontay McCray is another guy who, in the transfer portal, he didn't really do too much. And the one shining moment that he had, he had a couple of pressures against Alabama, but then next thing you know, his stats weren't that great. You want to see more productivity from him. And, he even missed that potential sack from Mason Heinschel back when they played Pitt at home last year. And that was a big factor in it. It was a big swing, because the wide receiver was left wide open. And, he had a lot of time in the pocket to kind of maneuver. And next thing you know, he was able to create a play out of nothing. But, I want to kind of see Kevin Wynn get a little bit more involved. I think the biggest factor for this defense in room two is the jack position. You didn't really use it much last year. And Rylan Kennedy's probably going to be your number one jack, as well as Jalen Anderson is going to be factored in there too. And Jalen Anderson is kind of an interesting wild card that you can think about also, because he was a top 5 JUCO defensive end last year. He has the body type. Now, obviously, coming from JUCO, you want to see him give a little more effort. You want to see him being able to be more consistent with everything. But I think you're going to rely on 8 to 7 guys, maybe even a true freshman or two down the road. I know they like Pinckney, the true freshman, as well as Cam Brooks, who's going to be recovering from his Achilles injury. I do think there's a couple of guys in this rotation that you can kind of be able to count on. But the problem is, Rylan Kennedy only had 3.5 sacks his entire career at Texas A&M. This isn't a guy that's going to be that much. So you're really relying on a lot of guys that are talented, but they haven't put up the production that you really need to see from a lot of guys. So I'm really factored in to see what happens, because I do like Nick Williams as a coach. I like Terrence Knighton. I think a lot of those guys are going to be really good for Florida State and what they can bring to the table. But the problem is, you got to have that consistency. It is Florida State. I'm not asking those guys to go out there and be Jared Verses and Jermaine Johnsons and guys like that. But can you be a Patrick Payton? Can you give me 6.5, 7.5, 8.5 sacks and be able to be productive? I mean, you have to probably have collective effort to be able to kind of do these things. But I think this is going to be setting the tone for a guy like Chris Jones, in the second level of the defense, and making it easier on the secondary, not being able to guard forever and ever and ever. You want to see that defense line, get that kind of pressure, and Tony White's going to have a successful year too if that were to happen. But let me know in the comments what you think about the defensive line. Do you like it? Do you hate it? Do you think it's okay? Do you think they're going to be able to survive with that defensive line that they have under control? Super excited to see what Florida State does this year. Man, we are one Saturday away. We are just a week away. I cannot believe it. This has been a long off season. I hope Florida State fans are ready for Doak Campbell Stadium, because it's going to be rocking with the garnet and gold. Hopefully we're able to kind of get an easier win, and Florida State can kind of get back on top and get to that SMU game on Labor Day night, and just hopefully we can go through and get a 2-0 start, and let's go ahead and get everything done there. But I appreciate all the love and support. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and as always, go Noles.